Hello, welcome back to the studio. Well, today I'm going to be painting in a very loose, painterly style. I did a similar sort of painting style recently when I painted this little woodland scene, and you really seemed to like it. So I thought, let's do a little bit more of this and experiment a bit further with it. I think learning to paint in a loose, painterly style and to sort of break through those sort of really tight sort of techniques that we've developed sometimes more through sort of fear of getting it wrong is something which we strive to do. I've watched artists paint the most amazing scenes with such apparent ease, and I look at their style and I look what they're doing and I think to myself, it's very obvious in the end. What I do and what they do can be very different. So sit back, relax, and I'm going to be painting this little scene in a very loose, painterly style. Now, the other thing to mention is that this video is sponsored by Meeden Art Supplies, and they gave me this lovely little sketchbox to use. You'll see more about that later on in the video. So, let's press on with our loose painting style.
So here's my canvas, 16 by 12 this week, painted with grey gesso. It's one of my paper canvases. And as usual, the first thing I want to do is work out the horizon line. And this is my reference photograph. I'm going to set my horizon line about a third down from the top. I'll use a ruler and a pencil. I measure down 4 inches, make a small mark. Then just put a very faint line across the canvas. Now, choice of brushes. Notice that all of these brushes are very well worn. In fact, this poor fan brush looks like it's had a bit nibbled out of it. We'll see as the painting progresses which one I favour the most. Now, let's put on some of this Bob Ross Liquid White oil paint. This is a wet on wet oil painting technique. I won't be using acrylics at all. I keep some of that liquid white in a small airtight container for ease of use. I'm going to start with the biggest brush, this 1/2 inch flat bristle brush. I want to apply a very thin, even coat above and below the horizon line. I scrub it on and make sure I've only applied just enough to make my canvas wet. I use some nice long strokes and then test my canvas with my fingertips. I can barely see my fingerprints, so that's about perfect. I take care not to rub out my pencil line. And I want to use this brush again, so I'm going to give it a good dry clean to remove all the surplus liquid white. I don't want that getting into my paint. And here's my reference photograph, and the first top tip: reduce the amount of detail you can see. Here I use a piece of greaseproof paper just to blur the effect. The sheet of greaseproof paper reduces the detail but leaves the shape. It's like squinting at your reference photograph. Now, let's look at the palette of colours. I'm going to start with this one first, for the sun. It's the thing that's furthest away in the reference photograph. I'll put a small amount on again, using my 1/2 inch brush. Try to just block in the area where the sun is in the painting. I use broad flat strokes. Same again for the reflections in the water. Don't fuss with things, just block in where you think the yellow patches need to be, then look for the next value, just above it and the reflection just below it in the water, a sort of a peachy colour. Let's try Indian yellow, cad yellow and a touch of alizarin crimson. Quite a nice colour. Let's try a little bit of red. I think that's even more peachy. Test your colours on the canvas. Apply a small amount again. No fussing, just block it in. Remember, we want to paint in a loose style. When you hear me say that, what I really should be saying is paint with some speed and don't fuss with things. There. Now stand back and check your painting against the reference photograph. I think some of these values are a little bit weak. They're a lot richer and these are too cool. I just need to sort of amplify the colours a bit. I add more red to warm things up. There. we'll apply that colour to the canvas. Once again, I just block it in roughly. I don't want to fuss with it, I just want the values to be nice and warm. There, I think we're about right now. To save on brush washing, I have a second 1/2 inch bristle brush. This time I want a lavender colour. I take a small amount of alizarin crimson and an even smaller amount of phthalo blue. I want to get that lovely sort of blue movie colour just behind those clouds. And add a touch of titanium white to just lighten things a little bit. Once again, block it in very loosely. Quick light strokes. And don't fuss with it. But you see, well, I did. Couldn't help myself. I managed to make a green sky. Yes, just there. The more I fiddle, the greener it gets. So, let's fix this. I go back to my lavender colour and increase the amount of alizarin crimson. Make a more sort of purple tone. This will counteract the green colour. And as you see, it takes it away almost completely, but I don't mind a little hint showing through here and there. After all, this is much more of an impression of the reference photograph rather than an exact copy. A little bit more blending, and that's it. I think we got that pickle back in the jar. Now let's have a go at some clouds. Here's that reference photograph and my palette. As you can see, I'm going to use that same flat brush into some titanium paint, and I'm going to dirty it down with some lavender, because those clouds, well, they're not white, are they? We think they are, but when you look more closely, you see they're anything but. Now, look at the way I'm holding my brush. This is called the stick grip in the palm of my hand. It means I can use the side of the brush to make marks on the canvas. Dabs and dots and dashes. I let the brush skip across the canvas. I'll leave these marks there. Sometimes this is called mark making. Sounds very fancy, but really all it is just making sort of an impression of where you think the clouds are. I look at the reference occasionally and dab in a little colour where I think it'll suit. Once again, I'll come back and add a few bright ones, but still not in pure white. Remember, in a loose style, we're just looking to get some colour in the right place, with the value sort of about correct. I'll drop in a couple of slightly lighter clouds just for a bit of variety. But once again, this is just dabs and dots. Now stand back. And as nothing's broken, there's nothing to fix. I take no more than 2 or 3 minutes just to add all the reflections in the water. And that's it. Done.
So you see from that last little section that really all I was doing there was trying to paint with a certain amount of pace. I think pacing yourself through a painting is probably one of the most key factors in doing loose painterly styles. Things seem to sort of come apart when we sit and ponder on things too much, when we sit and try and overanalyze what we're doing. When we try and get just too detailed with things, we lose that lovely fresh, technical ability just to apply colour and live with it. The colour doesn't have to be exactly right. It just has to be the right tone. And when I say the right tone, what I mean is that, if you've got a bright, sharp, light colour, then use a bright, sharp, light colour. It doesn't necessarily have to be exactly the same colours. And where we want shadow tones, just apply dark shadow tones. And it doesn't matter whether you're applying a dark brown sometimes, or maybe you might use a magenta tone. They're both dark shadow colours. Learn to trust your sort of abilities to discern lights from darks and shadows takes a little time. But with practice, it's a fun thing to do. There's something else I'm doing, but you'll have to discover that for yourself. Maybe you've already guessed.
Let's turn our attention to the background. This bank of trees. Once again, no detail here. Which brush should I use? I wonder. Maybe I'll stick to an Old Faithful. You got it. That old half-inch brush, I think it's going to do just right. This time I want a cool brown colour, Van Dyke brown. I just want to use the brush to make a mark on the canvas. I use the bristles because, well, they look like distant trees. By just dabbing with the brush, held in a stick grip, I can create the illusion. Thousands of trees, just got to get the size right. Let's grow it a little bit bigger in the reflection. Occasionally you see I turn the brush more on an edge if I want to sort of pick out slightly more of a group of trees. I add a little more tree here and there, stand back, add a little bit more and stand back. I work my way across the horizon line, making sure I sort of let the paint run out a bit where I think the sunshine's going to be. As I stand back, I want to add more dark, cool Van Dyke brown to the far left side, maybe even increase the reflection a touch more. I glance briefly at the reference photograph here. I'm just looking for, again, an impression of the trees, maybe the suggestion of a reflection, but no more. These are too far away to fuss with. I'll work my way across the horizon line, adding little clumps of trees as I go. I'll drop in the odd reflection here and there, but that's it. I'm still using just the bristles of the brush to give the impression of a tree. Time to tackle the sunrise. For this I will be using a palette knife. I take a small amount of titanium white paint, a little bit of this sort of contaminated cad yellow, a bit of Indian yellow and red in it. I think that looks about right. I'm going to take a small roll on the edge of my palette knife here. This is where a loose style is best suited to something like a palette knife. I just smear on where I think the colour needs to be lovely and pure and bright, just above the trees. And I don't really care if I lose the tree here and there, I can always put them back later on. Again, just single swipes of the palette knife. Leave the colour bright. Don't mess with it too much. You'll start making mud. I look at my reference photograph and decide to add just another little touch of brightness here. But that's it. I'm not going to mess around with it anymore. Okay, well, maybe I'll try and find a few of my trees back. There, just lift off some of the colour. An easy fix.
So, we've progressed our painting a little further, but I do want to bring to your attention something which I think is probably one of the most fundamental things I learned about painting. And that's the ability to learn to live with what we've done. Far too many times I think I and other people jump to the conclusion that something needs fixing before we know it really does. What I've discovered over the years of painting is that sometimes I do something which, well, it doesn't look very sort of attractive or it doesn't look like it's right. And I think I would try and fix it. In the end, what I learned to do though was to live with it. Live with it until you've got something else to bother you. And it's surprising that sometimes doing something like maybe painting those clouds doesn't look great until I've got something else on the painting to compare it with. And suddenly those clouds look much better, but maybe it's this that bothers me. Each successive layer makes the previous layers work. So try not to go back and fix things that really aren't broken. As you see, I come back and do a little bit of tinkering with my background sky, but just a little bit, and only after I've had a rest.
Now let's turn our attention to the foreground, the reed bed. And once again, I find myself using the trusty old half-inch bristle brush. Here I just want to again block in some colour. As you see, it's a tangled mess of stems and stalks. Can't tell which is what. So why try? I'm just going to use light touches with my brush and let the bristles do the work for me. I don't overthink this. I use the bristles to add the texture to the paint and stand back, and I like the effect. I'm not looking for anything photorealistic, I just want an impression. I'll use the side of my brush just to dab in where I think a few of the little feathery ends might be on the reeds. And I'll use the edge of my palette knife just to scratch out a few sticks and twigs.
Now, whilst my painting's having a little bit of a rest from me and me from it, let's have a look and see what I'm using today, which is this little sketchbox from Meeden Art Supplies. If you're like me, sometimes your art supplies can get, well, a little bit in a pickle. They get all over the place. You've got brushes here and paints there. And really what I want to do is get them all into one nice place where I can sort of sort through them properly. As you see, my studio can get a little hectic sometimes, and this little box is just what I was looking for. But apart from being a box, as you see, it's also great for sketching. It's dual purpose, perfect for a very small confined area, especially if you like to set up, do a little bit of painting, and then just collapse everything down and put it all away in one spot. There's a couple of little extra special tips I like to throw in that maybe make this just a little tiny bit more useful in case you're using smaller panels. If you think this sort of an art box is something which you've got to have in your little art studio, then use my special code HAPPYPAINTER10 and get 10% off your orders through Meeden Art Supplies.
And I've left a special link in the description below.
Happy painting!
With fresh eyes, I look at my painting a little more objectively. I decide to add just a tiny touch of pure white to this sun. And of course, I need to add a few more ripples to the water. It wasn't in the reference photograph, but I think, artistic license, they look good. I'll add them. Whilst I'm holding my palette knife, I think I'll add some more of those reeds. Again, I use just the short edge of my palette knife into some Van Dyke brown. Firm pressure and just slide the knife along. Just want to make the sort of impression of a few stems and stalks, but there are dozens of them. This took me a little while to do, but again, I didn't overwork it. I just dropped in a few where I thought they had the best effect. Now, back to my old friend. This time I'm going to go into some dark sienna and Van Dyke brown mixture on a sort of reddy brown colour for the little sort of feathery tips to these reeds. I use the side of the brush and just touch and leave a little mark of the bristles. Becoming a bit of a theme for me, isn't it? Here you see I just want, again, a very loose touch with my brush. It does all the work I need it to do. And when you stand back, they look just like reeds. Now, in the next moment, I get a bit excited. I mix up a lovely colour which I think matches the reference photograph. Yes, that's it, a nice peachy orange colour. I once again dry clean my bristle brush and use just the edge of it to add a few touches of highlight. As you see, just a few flicks of the brush is all it takes. I'll add a little white to it as well to make it a little brighter here and there. This was so much fun. It's a shame I forgot to hit record. Don't know how I managed to do it, but well, I did. I missed out a little bit, but you get the idea. Whilst I've got the lovely orangey colour on my brush, I'll add a few little touches of highlight to those background trees. Once again, don't overdo it. Just a few sparkles is all it takes. But the biggest test of all is knowing when to put down the brush. And it's now. Here's my reference photograph and my finished painting. I can say I'm very pleased with it. Now I am going to break one of my golden rules, which is to criticise my work in public, but I can see there are some deficiencies. Yes, I could have been a little darker in sky and a little darker here in the foreground, but overall, I think a success.
So there we have it, a loose painterly style painting. And how long do you think it took me to paint this? Well, bearing in mind I took an overnight break, the whole painting took under an hour. And I think that's the clue. Painting with a little more speed can really help us. Next week, I'm going to be doing something a little more challenging, but again, in a loose, painterly style. I hope you can join me. Happy painting, people!